Things at this point in Israel's history, where we are in 2 Kings 4, 8 through 37, things aren't good. Things aren't good in Israel, and idolatry is rampant. But God continues to work through Elisha the prophet, and we've already seen some legitimate miracles in his life and some prophecies that came true. He's dried up the waters of the Jordan River and crossed over it. He's healed the water at Jericho. He prophesied of Israel's victory over Moab. He's provided for a widow by multiplying oil. And so we continue to see God providing for his people through this powerful prophet, Elisha. And in this chapter, we continue to see more things that Elisha does. And it all really kind of starts with this godly woman who, let me tell you, this woman has not had it so easy. She's a godly person, apparently, from what we can tell, what we're going to see. She's not able to have children. She's not able to have children. Now, I'm not in that position. I've never been in that position. But I do know people that have been in the position, and it hits sometimes women particularly hard. There are godly women out there who are not able to have children. And that can be a tremendously painful experience for a person. Now imagine going through something like that, finally being able to have a child, the long awaited child you've been waiting for, and then he dies. I imagine that pain, I mean, listen, I don't imagine, I know it. That pain would be worse than never having a child in the first place. Because you have the child, you learn to love the child. The worst thing that could ever happen to a person is losing a child. And there's something about, it's like we were having this conversation. I was just having this conversation with my brother, and this is totally different, so much less. So it's such a buffoonish illustration. But we were talking about sports teams. And he said, the Jets have never even been to the Super Bowl. Would you rather be terrible for your whole life and never make it, or make it and lose? Because he was talking to a Bills fan. And, as we all know, the Bills, sorry. But I hate to bring up the pain of 4 consecutive Super Bowl losses. Not like they didn't lose, and then 10 years later they lost again. They lost. And then they got back they lost the worst way you could lose. They lost on a missed field, wide right. I'm like, how do you miss that? It was a 38-yard field, 42-yard field goal, which today is a chip shot. Back then it wasn't. Sorry if I'm bringing up the pain. But then next year it happens again. And then the next year it happens again. And then the next year it happens again. Then they're going to beat Kansas City. They're going to beat them. They had them beat. They had them won. It was over. 35 seconds left or something like that? 25 seconds left. It was over. They were going to go to the city. Then they lost. So would you rather continue to lose in the big game or just not even get there? And I said, you know what, I got to tell you, Jeff, I think I'd rather not get there. I mean, I've been through some of these things. I think I'd rather not get there. It's just so painful when it's like you finally get there and you have there's a hope and then you lose. It's just painful. Well, multiply that times like 1 billion. Give this hope that one day you might have a child. You finally get a child and you lose them. The worst thing that could possibly happen. Well, that happens. Today's passage. Let's take a look. 2 Kings 4, beginning with verse 8. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman. And she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. Now, this woman is from Shunem, and some of you may not know where that is, but just to kind of give you a feel, if we're outlining where Israel is in the ancient world, we're This is something along, today I guess the border would go down this direction, down towards the very tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, towards modern day Eilat. But anyway, if we are looking at the ancient context where you have the northern and southern Israel, we're going to just draw a line somewhere around here, and northern Israel is going to include, Gilead and that type of stuff. Well, if we were to zoom in on the Jezreel Valley, which is right here, and we were going to kind of go down towards the southern portion, you have a city you might recognize. You might recognize the name of Jezreel. Anyone remember what happened at Jezreel? What's that? Actually, well, it hasn't happened yet, but the Valley of Megiddo is here, where Armageddon would take place. Good answer. But something happened here in Kings at Jezreel. Does anyone remember what happened at Jezreel? This is probably I would give this a Bible trivia for 600 type of a thing. It involved, I'll give you a hint. Go ahead.
I'm going to say that
Mount Carmel's here.
killed at the Kishon River. Is that where it's
Wait, what was that?
No, look, I'm reading the wrong one. Okay.
Oh, you're cheating. Oh man, it's there. She's cheating. She is cheating. Oh, Abby. Next time, don't be like, what did it say there? That's good stuff. Let me just get that out of the way so you don't read that one. So, at Jezreel, do you remember a guy named Naboth? Anyone remember that guy? And that guy's vineyard and Ahab and some of that stuff, right? And some more stuff's going to happen at Jezreel soon enough with Jezebel. But I don't want to spoil what's going to happen. Who let the dogs out? But we'll deal with that another time. So if Jezreel is right here, then just a couple miles away, as the bird flies, I want to call it 4 off the top of my head, but let's call it about 4 miles from Jezreel is Shunem, and it's right basically in the Jezreel Valley. And if Elisha is frequenting Mount Carmel, which he does frequent, Jezreel's only a few miles down the Jezreel Valley, and battles would happen here. Well, anyway, if you wanted to get from the coastlands, you wanted to get from the coastal plains and over towards Gilead or to the south points, you would a lot of times travel through the Jezreel Valley, and it was an easy way. Then you get down the Jordan River Valley, and it was easy traveling. Instead of like hiking up and through mountains and all that stuff, you'd be going down through the valleys, and it'd be easy to get around. Well, that's where this woman is. She's a prominent woman, about 20 miles from Mount Carmel. She's providing hospitality for God's prophet, which kind of reminds me of an older woman that I know. This older woman, she lives down the street from my house, and her name's Clemmy, which is short for Clementine. Is it Clementine? It's Clementine. And she's an old lady, and you'd go by her place, and she'd invite you in every single time. And she'd try to give you everything she had, including like a glass of wine and alcohol or something like. Josh and I went in a few times and talked to her, and she would try to give us everything. No, and she'd open up her fridge and try to give you everything. She was always trying to provide hospitality. She's got to be in her 90s. She's got to be in her 90s at this point. But anyway, kind of reminds me of Clemmy a little bit. She provides hospitality to Elisha, and it becomes so frequent that she wants to build like a guest room for him, most likely on the roof. She said to her husband, "Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Please let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, and it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there." We're going to basically build a room where we can kind of provide hospitality to this man of God so that he has like a refuge, a little place to stay on his traveling throughout. So she's kind of committed to this act of hospitality. And Elisha sees this and he wants to reward her. And that's, even Jesus says something like, if you give a cup of water, in my name, right? That type of thing. So that's kind of what you have here. He sees that she's providing and he asks her what she would like. Check this out in verses 11 through 13. One day he came there and turned into the upper chamber, so now he's staying there. She's providing hospitality. He turned into the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant. Now this is a guy we haven't heard of yet. This is the first time we see him. We don't know anything about Gehazi. Is Gehazi a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he a servant? Do you remember what was Elisha's relationship to Elijah? What would you, if you had to give him a title? You would say servant, okay? You would say servant. So Elisha was Elijah's servant. Well, Gehazi is Elisha's servant. So he's kind of carrying out the same role that Elisha once carried out. Elisha turned out pretty good. Will Gehazi turn out pretty good? We'll find out soon enough. All right, not today, we won't find out. You'll have to keep coming back to find out what happens with Gehazi. But anyway, so then Elisha said to Gehazi, his servant, call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, say now to her, behold, you have been careful for us with all this care. In other words, you've provided all this hospitality for us. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army, the general of the army? And she answered, I live among my own people. And so what we have here is a really nice offer where Elisha has some type of influence with the king of Israel, and he's offering to go before the king and speak on her behalf to the king. In other words, if you want to ask for something. Now this king has kind of been around to see Elisha's work. This king thought it was all over. Remember, it was all over. The Lord has sent us here to wipe us out. And Elisha was the one who prophesied of how to kind of get out of that and that God was going to deliver them. So Elisha's got some influence here. He knows that Elisha is a man of God. Well, anyway, ask what you want, and we're going to go to the king. We go to the general of the army. We go to the king, and we could request it, and you're basically going to get it. That's the implication here. We can go before the king, and we can ask you for what you want, and you're basically going to get it. Which is an earthly reward for her earthly hospitality. She's providing hospitality to the prophet, and the prophet says, "We want to do something for you." You ever get something from someone, and you're so appreciative of it, you want to do something back? That ever happen? That happens. There are a lot of people in my life. They've done so many things for me, and they're just like little things that I want to do back to kind of bless them back for how much they've blessed me. You've been in those situations, I'm sure, all the time. Well, this woman, this is a really nice offer. But she's happy where she is. She's content in the town that she's living in. She doesn't need advancement in Samaria, the capital city. She doesn't need advancement with the king. She's happy with her people and with the protection of her townspeople. But Elisha is really thankful for her and for her hospitality, and he really wants to provide some kind of blessing for her. And so he pulls his servant Gehazi aside, and he looks into this a little bit more, and he said, "What then is to be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Truly, she has no son, and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." Hold on, I don't want you to read ahead. He said, "Call her." When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then Elisha said, "At this season next year, you will embrace a son." And she said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." So this woman wants a son so badly that she can't even bear the thought of hope that doesn't get fulfilled. Again, why, that's for me, like sports comes in, like, man, oh, I had so much hope. I had too much. The Rangers were favored. They were favored to win at one point. I'm like, man, they're going to do it. Could they do it? They didn't do it. And then my hope is, I'd rather lose, I'd rather be down 10-0 in the first inning and know it's over than sit there and watch a missed field goal, right? Do you wish they didn't even make that game? Was it that painful? For me, it would have been that painful. You wish they didn't even get there. You'll never forget the name Scott Norwood. You'll never forget it, and neither will Buffalo, or the whole world for that matter. You know, you'll never forget the name of Scott Norwood or Ray Finkel. But anyway, so those are two guys that'll go down in history for missing a Ray Finkel was a movie reference, if you guys didn't get that. But anyway. She can't even stand the idea of a hope that doesn't get fulfilled. That's how she longs for a son. And in that day, it was tremendously important. And it's important to people today, but in that day, it was like the idea was that you were cursed if you weren't able to have children. It was shameful to be barren. It was often seen as a punishment from the Lord, unfortunately. But there's no punishment from the Lord here. This is a godly woman. Actually, what the reality is that God allowed her to not have children for this moment. But she doesn't know that. She doesn't know that at this point. This woman's not living in sin or anything like that. It just happened. Unfortunately, it just happened that she wasn't able to have a child. And so she's experiencing that pain. And when Elisha hears about that desire, he prophesies that in 1 year she'll give birth to the long-coveted son. And that reminds me of a situation with Sarah. Remember Sarah? Remember the visitors came before they went to Sodom and destroyed that wicked city of Sodomites? Well, the three men visited Abraham and Sarah and prophesied that Abraham would have a child. And what did she do? She laughed. Something similar happened with Hannah and the birth of her son, Samuel, when she was praying before Eli. At first, we see that this woman isn't sure whether she should believe Elisha. She's almost in shock. Again, she can't bear the thought of getting her hopes up only to be crushed. But within a few months, she's pregnant, and within a year, this godly woman bears a son. The woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. And so this is an awesome provision. It's an awesome provision from the Lord that so many people in her circumstance would love to have experienced. And the Lord has provided her. Now, that doesn't mean that the Lord's going to provide every person with a child that wants one. But in this particular case, he does. By the way, there are some circumstances where people think they're never going to have a child and they end up having one. It happens. It does happen. I feel like we had former members here who weren't able to have children for some time until, I don't want to say the names, but I'm right. They weren't able to have a child until much later in life. And they had two. They had two pretty big kids, if I remember. Pretty tall, big kids. But he was a big, tall guy. But anyway, so, God provides this couple with a child, and it was a glorious time where this woman, she has this baby, and she nurses this baby, and she watches him grow up. And for those of you who have had a child, at least that first child is like your whole life revolves around the child. What are they going to do next? Did they are they eating baby food next? Are they taking the first step next? When are they going to say their first word? Dad, right? Not mom, not mama, right? Did one of ours say dad first? Dad. I think it's a little easier to say dad. But anyway, so it's a glorious thing to watch your children grow, especially if they're godly. Watch your children grow up into godly people. And by the way, you should be intentional about making that happen. You can't make your kids godly. You can't make another person. You cannot make another person be a godly person. You could lead them in that direction in the end, You can influence them toward godliness, but the unfortunately truth is that they're going to listen. They're going to decide whether they want to be godly people or not. And unfortunately, too many people lead their children towards. They think they're leading their children towards godliness, but there's just so much compromise in their life that the kids see that compromise and follow that compromise. Well, anyway, years go by where she has this son. Again, a glorious time in her life where for all those years she's been waiting and waiting for a son, and now she finally has a son. The desire of her heart. And then the unthinkable happens, as you already know. This young man or boy, he goes out to work with his father. And he gets seriously ill. Look at verse 18. When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. So they're farming. It's an agricultural society. The kid's old enough to work. I don't know what that age is exactly. We don't have it here. But probably a young teenage, preteenish, maybe a little earlier. Child was grown. The day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. He said to his father, "My head, my head." In other words, my head is, you ever get a blasting headache? Who here deals with migraine? Monday is headache day for me. That's what I always say to my, it's headache day. I don't know what it is. There's the work of Sunday, and then Monday morning, I get the case of the Mondays, and I in my head I'm gonna get a headache. I try to do light work on Mondays because that happens. But anyway, and sometimes my head, when I had the sinus problems, my head would blast. It would be so bad. The only thing, and even now, the only thing that can resolve it, I could take an Advil, I could take a second Advil, and it doesn't do the job. The only thing that is like a 30-minute nap. I sleep for 30 minutes, and then I wake up, and my headache is better. I don't know what it is, a pressure, I don't know what it is, but this boy's head is in severe pain. My head. And he said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." So the father sends the boy to his mother. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. So what we see here is years go by in a single phrase. We see nothing about it because those things aren't really significant to the story. His head starts blasting in pain, and they don't have the modern medicine that we have. We don't know what happened here. I mean, was there a hemorrhage? Was there, I don't know, a stroke? We don't know what happened. We don't know. He's taken to his mother. She holds him in her arms and watches him die. Could you imagine watching your kid die in your arms? Can you think of anything worse to experience in life than holding your kid until he dies? Man, I don't know that there's anything worse. I really don't think there's anything worse. You come to me about it, but I think that's at the very top of the worst things that could possibly happen to a person. I think most people would rather die of cancer than have to watch their kid die in front of them. I read an article this week. I don't remember the whole context. Oh man, their family, they were on vacation somewhere. One of the kids died. That was it. The family, the older brother was playing badminton, and he swung the badminton racket. The piece broke off of it, lodged into his sister's head, and she died on vacation. And they're driving back from vacation, and the account was something like, it was like surreal that they're pulling over to get food, and now they have to get food for 5 instead of 6. Something like that. And how the brother feels like he killed his sister. And the family is feeling, like, and you think about this and like the pain and the suffering that's involved in, it's almost like I'd rather not even have a kid, I think, than to have my kid die. If given the choice of those two things, I mean, it's hard to, once you have the kid, you can't imagine not having the kid. But man, if you could go back logically and just say, which one would I rather? I'd rather never have a kid than know the loss of it, I think. This is the worst thing, and it comes out of nowhere. He woke up healthy enough to go to work with his dad, and later that day he's gone. And that's how life and death works sometimes. Everything's going along well, you don't have any notice. Someone you know and love, someone close to you, gets in a car accident and dies. Has a heart attack and dies. And your life changes at that moment. And something about it never really goes back to normal for a long, long time. And if it's your kid, I imagine ever. For this woman, it's the worst thing that you could possibly imagine. This son was a promise from the man of God, a gift from the Lord, and she cannot accept that he's gone. And so she springs into action. She puts the child in the man of God's room and gets permission to go and visit Elisha, the prophet. She went up, laid him on the bed of the man of God, Elisha, the room that she had built, and shut the door behind him and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, please send me one of the servants, because she needs someone to protect her. She needs a chaperone to go travel. Please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return. He said in verse 23, why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it will be well. All is well. All right? She's like not even telling him what's going on. Like she can't even say the words. She can't even tell him what's happened. Then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you. So she went and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. So, I find it interesting that the husband's like, why would you go see him? It's not new. It's like, so yeah, we'll visit the prophet on a new moon or on a Sabbath, like one of these holy days, but not on other days. That's an interesting thing out there. Apparently that's something that would perhaps have happened. But what she does is, if we're looking back at the Jezreel Valley, and if she's in Shunem, and the prophet is at Mount Carmel, and if you were to take, as the crow flies, and go from Shunem to Mount Carmel, you see that is right around 20 miles. It's going to take more than 20 miles to get there because it's not an exact perfect straight shot, but it's about 20 miles. It's pretty close to almost exactly 20 miles, which would take perhaps 6 hours. We're going to assume 6 hours because you can't just get into a car. For us to travel 20 miles, depending on where those 20 miles are, it could take 20 minutes. If you live in Manhattan, it could take an hour and a half. It could take 2 hours, right? But if you're traveling in my house is maybe, I don't know if it's 10 miles and it takes 20 minutes. So just to, we're going to call it 6 hours because you're not able to power to get into a vehicle and drive. You're traveling by donkey. So we're going to call it 6 hours if she's lucky, which is an excruciatingly long trip for a woman who's in deep mourning. That's 12 hours. Down and back is 12 hours, and nothing can happen. You're just sitting there, you're just waiting for something to happen, and you can't accept the fact that your son is gone. And when she gets to Mount Carmel, Gehazi meets her in verses 25 and 26. So she went and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, behold, there's the Shunammite. That's the Shunammite woman. Please run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. Is it well? It couldn't be further from well, right? It's not well. Who said no? It's not well, right? It's the opposite of well. It's bad. Things are really bad. But she tells Gehazi, all is well. She tells her husband, all is well. She's not interested in resolving this problem with those guys. She is focused on dealing with the man of God. She can see the difference perhaps between Gehazi and Elisha. And if you know the passage, you can know there's a little bit of a difference between these two guys, Gehazi and Elisha. Well, anyway, she's desperate. Verse 27, when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came near to push her away. You know, Gehazi, man, this guy, he's really perceptive. You know, he's sharp. He's on the ball, right? Like, maybe Gehazi, you ought to wait and see what's up before you shove a woman who just lost her child down. You know what I mean? Like, duh, hello. But anyway, Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God said, let her alone. He can see what's up. For her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. And listen to her words. Then she said, did I ask for a son from my Lord? And that's not the Lord, that's not Yahweh. Did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Elisha recognizes what anyone with half of a heart could probably see is that her soul is troubled. And it probably doesn't take rocket science to figure out this involves her son. When Elisha realizes what's happened, he sends his servant to go to the boy and heal him. But the woman, check her actions out here. Then he said to Gehazi, gird up your loins. Gird up your loins. It's like gather up your loins. Basically, you're like tucking in your cloak. Here, get going. Gird up your loins. Not a term we would use today so much. Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him. If anyone salutes you, do not answer him. And go lay my staff on the lad's face. The implication being that this child's going to be healed. And the mother of the lad said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. In other words, you can say Gehazi all you want, but I'm staying with you. Again, she's not really trusting that Gehazi could do anything about this, but she believes that the prophet of the Lord can. And he arose and followed her. Now, what's interesting is, look at these words that she says. As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. Does that sound familiar? Does that ring a bell to anyone? It didn't ring a bell initially to me, and I looked up the cross-reference and I got it. I see a hand. What's that? You know, it's actually similar to something that Ruth said. That's not bad. That's not terrible. Not terrible. Well, was it Ruth? Yeah, Ruth. Ruth said to Naomi, That's good. That's a good answer. It's a good answer. But it's not the exact words. These exact words were said by someone else.
Was it Elisha to Elijah?
It was Elisha to Elijah. You got it. You got it. Check this out. Back in 2 Kings 2, to Elisha himself, he said to Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. That's a good catch. Again, I didn't catch it right off the bat. It's a good catch. Verse 4. Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And so these are words that he repeatedly said to Elijah the day Elijah was going to be, what? Taken up in a whirlwind, right? In a whirlwind. The day he was going to depart the earth. And now, here he is, hearing those exact words being spoken to him. That's got to resonate with him a little bit, I would think, unless he's completely forgotten that he's used those exact words, which I highly doubt that's the case. I remember the last words I said to Nick before he died. I didn't know he was going to die, but I remember the words I said. And I remember the exact words I said before I found out he died. So, you don't forget some of those things. I imagine he didn't forget that, and these words probably stick with him. So the man of God goes with her. He goes with her on the 6-hour trip through the Jezreel Valley to the town of Shunem. And 6 hours later, it's now been 12 hours since the boy died, at least. 6 hours later, Gehazi reaches the boy, and just as the woman suspected, it could be late at night, it could be the next morning. We don't really have. Maybe it was earlier than that. I don't know. We don't have the exact time. But Gehazi reaches the boy. And just as the woman suspected, Gehazi wasn't able to accomplish anything. Look at verses 31 and 32. Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face. It's like, well, he told me to lay the staff on the face. Let me just go ahead and do that. And let's see what happens here. That's what Gehazi's like. He lays the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him the lad is not awakened. When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. And so Elisha gets there and he sees death. He sees a cold, lifeless body, probably blue. Not a good situation. It's over. It's over. That body is only a shell of the boy, a shell that the boy once lived in, a vehicle. And he has departed, he's gone. And for anyone who has lost someone close, that's a tough day. That's a life-changing, if you lost a child, that is a life-changing tough day. Well, Elisha knows something that maybe other people don't know, and that is that the Lord can do anything. The Lord can do anything. The Lord has authority over life and death. And so he prays for the boy to be healed. Verse 33, so he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on, I'm backing this down a little bit. He put his mouth on the boy's mouth, which that makes Elisha ceremonially unclean. But there's something bigger than being clean or unclean at this point. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on the boy's mouth and his eyes on the boy's eyes and his hands on the boy's hands. You're like, what is going on here? By the way, this is not a prescription on how to take care of the dead. Okay, so you don't go and just lay yourself on that. That's not something you do. But Elisha was doing what he was doing. And he stretched himself on the boy, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth and went up and stretched himself on him a second time. And the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. It's a miracle. The kid comes back to life. God miraculously brought this lad back to life, just as he had done during the ministry of Elijah with the widow in Zarephath. You remember, she lost a son, and Elijah was able to, through the Lord, bring that son back to life. And now here, Elisha is praying to the Lord, recognizing the Lord has his power, that God has power over life and death, and that Elisha is his prophet. And God brings this child back to the dead, and Elisha presents the son alive. He called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came into them, he said, take up your son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. It is a glorious turn of events. Greater than any turn of event you've ever experienced in your life. The Lord raised the boy from the dead. And it is just because Elisha did it and Elijah did it. But the Lord is the one who really did it. And it's just a picture of what's to come. It's a picture of what's to come with Jesus when he raises multiple people from death by his own power, because Elijah and Elisha, they couldn't do this by themselves. God had to do this. But Jesus does it with the word of his mouth. Jesus speaks and it happens. You might remember with the creation, God said, let there be light, and we know that he created all things through Christ, by him and for him, right? Jesus spoke. Jesus is far greater than Elijah or Elisha. He has full authority over birth, over health, over life, over death. He has full authority over eternal life. And really, when we say this resurrection is a picture of things to come, it's not only a picture of the resurrections, the temporary resurrections that Jesus would carry out, but maybe just a shadow, just the tiniest shadow of Jesus' own resurrection and the resurrection of all of us to everlasting life. Maybe just the tiniest bit. Maybe the tiniest bit of that. One guy says something like that. He says that the resurrection of this young lad is a, quote, sneak preview of our own resurrection to eternal life. Except our resurrection is not to another temporary life. Like the boy would die again eventually. Our resurrection is for eternity with God. In this passage, a godly woman continued to look to the Lord for help. When she was barren, who did she go to for help? She turned to the Lord, and she left it in God's hands. When her son died, she turned to the Lord. She trusted the Lord. Now that doesn't mean, and it's just not going to happen. You're not going to lose someone and see them come back from the dead until the resurrection. God's word is complete. His word has been authenticated. We're not seeing that type of stuff happen today. But she did turn to the Lord. She trusted in the Lord to answer her troubles. And in this, there's something there for us that we need to do the same thing. Again, we can't expect the same answers. The woman that desperately wants a child today can't expect that she's getting she's going to have a guarantee of a child. God may provide her with a child, and he may not. And when we lose someone, we certainly should not expect that God would raise them back in this life. We've got to be careful about that. Those are extraordinary events that we read about. But those extraordinary events that we read about illustrate this truth that applies to the widow, or to the Shunammite woman, and applies to us. This truth that God cares for us and provides for us, and what he provides for us is greater than what he provided for this woman in this passage. What he provides for us is the resurrection of Jesus and everlasting life through faith in his Son. And so we can understand that truth about God, that he loves us and he cares for us so much that he would send his Son to die for us. And we can know that God has complete authority over sickness and health, over life and death, and ultimately over everlasting life. Hope that Bible study was valuable to you in some way, we're going to turn to hymn number 120 and close our